Hello, today I am going to cover the haunted sycamores that had led to many tales. The sycamore tree is called the ghost of the forest by the Indians because of its cream-colored splotches on its trunk and branches, which give it a skeletal appearance when it's in the moonlight, especially when it's a full moon. One such story that has the original to been attributed to the Shawnee Indians revolves around two haunted sycamore trees, which were located where the warrior's path crossed the Licking River in east-central Kentucky. The Shawnees were always careful and buried past these two trees. They observed that seldom they would see birds, and the birds never seemed to nest in either one of these two sycamores. It was also noted that wild animals avoided these trees, although occasionally a dead one would be found high up in the branches, as if it had been grabbed from the ground and killed. The legend of the twin sycamores revolved around one of the Shawnee's ancestral maidens and a captured Cherokee warrior. The original story went back to several hundred years to one of the raids made by the Shawnees on the southern Cherokee. A young brave had been wounded during the capture, but because of his courage, instead of being killed, he had been taken to the Shawnee village north of the Ohio River. During this convalescence, a daughter of the Shawnee chief had fallen in love with him. Realizing since their tribes were sworn enemies that it was impossible for them to marry, the two decided to escape after the Cherokees' recovery. Knowing they both would be killed if captured, they planned the journey south to the Big Cumberland Gap, then west, away from both of their tribes. So late one summer night, after the warrior was well enough to travel, they quietly slipped away from the village. For several days, they hurried south along the warrior's path because they could make better time along this route. On the fourth day, they heard a dog barking behind them and knew that the girl's father and warriors were fast catching up. Although they were almost exhausted, they hurried on the hope that they would be able to outdistance their pursuers. As darkness began to set, in a storm that could be heard brewing in the south, and after a few more miles of running, the couple suddenly found themselves on the bank of the river. It's called the Licking. In the middle of the raging storm, realizing that they were trapped, the two young couples clung to each other while their pursuers drew closer. When the Shawnee chief and his warriors were within a few yards of the young couple, there came a bright streak of lightning, followed by an earth-shaking clap of thunder. Several of the pursuing Indians were knocked off their feet by the lightning strike, which tore a large cavity into the ground where the young couple had once been standing. No trace of them were ever found. Several years later, two sycamore trees, one larger than the other, grew out of the depression. It was observed by the Indians in passing the spot that after the two trees became large and a wind blew, the long limbs seemed to caress each other. It was also noted that when a storm rushed along the river, the larger tree would sway in such a manner to put itself in front of the smaller one to protect it. So the legend is told. When the first white pioneers came to the area and heard the strange tale concerning the tree, they laughed at the idea of eventual evil spirits inhabiting the sycamores. To show he wasn't afraid, a strong-willed settler started to cut one of the trees with an axe. The blade glanced off of the wood and cut his leg, which caused him to bleed to death in an unusually short time. A few days later, after this incident, a strangled man was found hanging about 20 feet off the ground with his neck between the two limbs, which could not possibly support his weight had he climbed the tree. Of the largest sycamore, the following morning, another dead man was found sitting under the smaller tree with appearance of having been scared to death, since there were no marks of violence on his body. Naturally, these strange deaths unnerved the pioneers, and they began to wonder about the legend which the Indians told. With unspoken agreement, the twin sycamores were therefore avoided. The trail which passed near them eventually grew over with briars and small underbrush, and the legend was gradually forgotten. While the story of the Indian couple, their strange deaths, and the 200 trees sounds like a romantic legend, the fact remains that there were, until 1921, two large sycamores, one slightly smaller than the other, standing on the banks of the Lincoln River near where the Warrior Path crossed it. The Shawnee Indians did tell the first white settlers in this area the legend of the haunted twin sycamores and the strange deaths caused by the two trees of the three pioneer men did occur. It appears in the diary written in 1780 of pioneer Eliza Caudill. For no apparent reason, the larger tree began to shrivel, dried up, and fell in 1921. Strangely, the smaller sycamore also dried up a few months later and fell across the trunk of the larger one. There is nothing more puzzling than that expected fact. I hope you enjoyed this short story.